Hello, my name is Tim Ely, and I'm a volunteer with Climate Safe Villages. Climate Safe Villages is a movement to create sustainable communities worldwide, which will be resilient to climate change. And you can find more about Climate Safe Villages at climatesafevillages.org. If you are watching or listening to this, you are most likely concerned about climate change. That concern is what brought people together to form the Climate Safe Villages movement. That same concern also motivates some people to write stories about what might happen in the future as humans have to deal with the effects of climate change. And this is a subgenre of sci-fi, and it's called cli-fi, which is short for climate fiction. So today I will be speaking with Les Kuzyk, and forgive me if I mispronounce that. But Les is active in the Climate Safe Villages forums online, and he's an author of a number of cli-fi books, and the first of which is titled Pinatubo 2. And we will be talking about cli-fi in general, the value of telling stories, and some things we may be seeing in the future or are already starting to see, and some of which are touched on in Les's books. So hello, Les, and welcome.
Hello there. Yeah, I'm Les Kuzyk, and yeah, very appreciative of this interview, as well as the Climate Safe Village initiative for sure.
So Les, I guess to start off with, when and how did you become concerned about climate change?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting story to me because it's gone over and over in my head so many times. I live in Calgary, the Stampede City, in southern Alberta, up in Canada. So yeah, I work for the city itself, the city of Calgary, and I've been there for over 30 years. And there we were. I'm an analyst in a planning department. There we were coming up with a new tool for our planners. The planners have what they call their triple bottom line. So that's economics, environmental, and social. So we decided we're going to come up with a new measurement tool for them. Started doing the research. I started doing the research on environmental and started reading books. This is the click moment for me. I'm flipping the cover back and forth. It's a book or a paper about climate change, and I'm not believing that this is true. I can't believe that this is true science. It seems to me that I'm reading fiction here, but it isn't. So that was quite the tipping point for me personally. That's about 15 years ago, yeah. So we did develop significant tools. I did for quantification of carbon emissions, for example, as one unit. But yeah, that was the starting point for me. And to be honest, it was something of a 5 year time of I can believe it, I can't believe it. And this is quite depressing, a cycle of depression and worry and okay, good that I'm doing something about it, which, yeah, so sort of a cycle like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that I that is actually sounds similar to other people's stories where they're not thinking about it, and they for whatever reason they run into the science, and they're like, oh my.
Yeah.
um so people have different kinds of reactions when they learn what's going on. And it sounds like your reaction was, or at least one reaction was, you started to write cli-fi. So what led you to do that?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting too, because first of all, thought, okay, I'm going to get the data together. A good measurement tool. It's a footprint tool that does measure. It came out of UBC, called the Ecological Footprint, but it's running out of Oakland, California. That's the main office of Global Footprint Network's initiative. And I picked that as the tool and then put together the data set for the people that I work with and tried to promote it. And then even went to the extent of, because I have a university degree in geography, and then I did a master's degree in anthropology. So I'm very interested in people. And it seemed like a good overlap between social justice and climate justice. And it seemed like a good thing to do would be to publish an academic paper. So I successfully published two academic papers. That's in 2011 and 2012. So the starting point was actually we're just going to put the data, the reality of what's going on, out into science with a measurement tool, which is useful from my perspective as an analyst, and should be all good. And surprise, it was not at all. In fact, it was completely ignored, as the science, many people would realize, is profoundly ignored. So, yeah, that did not solve the problem. Uh, but about that time, there was one professor, I think he's an Australian, who was looking for stories. He wanted a projection, a speculation story on what might come out of this. So I wrote a little one then. And so I had the option at that time to, oh, perhaps it's better understanding humans as they are for myself, that if they don't hear science, facts, figures, and the truth in quantified terms, they do hear stories. So maybe it's better to shift over into writing storylines and lace the storylines with a bit of science or some science. And that was sort of what happened for me. I realized this science paper, which explained this, the scope of the problem. It should be clear as third grade arithmetic is the way I put it. Sometimes it should be overwhelmingly clear, but it gets ignored. Uh, so yeah, that was um, that was when it seemed to me it was useful to continue writing, which I had already been doing, writing fiction, and shift over into a climate outcome story, which could be, I don't really like the word, if I could put this in, fiction. I call it a speculation. And that's based on a Canadian writer here. And it's a speculation, which means it really could come about, not a fantasy fiction type. So, yeah, that was the beginning, and that's what I've stuck with. I shifted my research over into a storyline and still do the research, but put this research into a storyline. Although I'll just say one more thing, I did publish one last academic paper just December of last year, 2023. So stared at the data for a decade. There it is. Might as well publish it. But that really is one last kick at the can because I expect really nothing out of that. So, yeah.
Well, it's awesome when you get published. Not that I've ever been published, but it must be a good feeling to have a science paper published. Um, so you were doing writing before you switched to climate speculation.
Well, as it turns out, I have the personality type that every time I looked at it, it kept telling me you could be a writer. And I couldn't believe that because very limited vocabulary. I don't speak well, don't present publicly well, face to face stuff. Meetings just don't work for me. So I tested it out by writing my thesis at the university with the master's degree. And as it turned out, I quite liked that. And it was a really good test. That's what I like to do, is test things out. So starting then about 20 years ago or a little more, yeah, I just started writing because Well, the writing club here in my city tells me if you want to be a writer, you need 1 million words to develop a voice. So just keep writing, whatever you're writing. So I did do that. I did just kept on writing, and I've self-published several books in the past, including the two up over my shoulder. Those are self-published, and that is a series, a climate reality series. So the third book is written now. I've got it with some Canadian publishers. So I'm going to try one more time to get somebody to a publishing house to publish, and if not, I'll self-publish the third in that series as well. So yeah, it's been a long term, but I don't think I'll be stopping at all writing. It's something that I do now. So yeah.
Okay. So, some climate speculation stories, which I've read, and I could cite a few well-known books. They take place many decades or even centuries in the future, after the world has been profoundly affected by climate change. And in contrast, your books take place only 10 or 15 years in the future. So it's much more near term. So what is your thinking in choosing to explore a relatively near term time frame?
Yeah, that's a lot to do with my identity. So when I signature, I typically say writer, analyst, and that's me. I was always good with the numbers and arithmetic and math, but I could also do the writing thing. So if I switch hats back and forth, as an analyst, I produce graphs, and you can see that. I mean, the variability of the accuracy, the further into the future, becomes less accurate. Uh, so really, for that reason, there's no point in trying to project too far off into the future. So I don't go beyond 20 years. What I'm writing right now is 20 years, and I won't go beyond that. And I do it in 5-year segments. So that's how I'm putting together this series, which is going to become a 5-book series, but each is separated by 5 years. So another 5 years in the future, what's likely to happen? And it's good because it takes time, as in 2 or 3 years, to write a book. So that time has passed. So I've got more reality to help with estimating the sequential book that's coming out. So yeah, it's mostly from an analytical perspective, and I'm very interested in assisting with the reality of our species here on this planet right now, as opposed to entertaining somebody with a fantasy or some far off projection into the future. So yeah, that's the reason why.
So your first book is titled Pinatubo 2. And Pinatubo is a very famous volcano in the Philippines, which erupted back in 1991. And your second book is Krakatoa, which is another famous volcano. So I'm detecting a volcano theme here. And I think I can guess, but could you talk about the significance of the titles of your books?
Yeah, for sure. It's very interesting to me what I discovered through research. There's a professor named David Keith who used to be here at the University of Calgary, and now he's with Harvard outside of Boston. Still, he's somebody who points out that, so for example, with Pinatubo, the 1991 eruption, it's a very well documented volcanic eruption that did cool off our planet for 3 or 4 years by approximately half a degree Celsius. interesting that that has happened in the past. And the most interesting thing that comes from David Keith is that for very low cost and very low technology, we can replicate that. We could do that. There's a lot of good reasons not to, but there's a lot of good reasons that we should have responded to climate change, some decades ago. So, however you want to look at it, that's the reason for the title, Pinatubo. It's existed. It's got solid data associated, and Pinatubo 2 is a speculation on what people might do. So, yeah, that's what the 2 comes from. It's like version 2 of your software or whatever. It was supposed to be. I'm not sure how well it resounds, that title, but Pinatubo 2 is set in 2027. And yeah, it's all about an engineer from Calgary here and another engineer from Washington State. And they meet together on contract. They're on contract in Africa, and they're being told what the tests are, and they're running the tests. And they gradually realize that what they're testing out is an initiative to, geoengineer a cooler planet in the interests of countries that are impacted highly by a climate crisis. So, yeah, that's where the title comes from. It's an attempt to version 2 it into the near future. So, yeah.
Okay. So basically the idea, in case anyone hasn't run across this yet, is the volcanoes spewed out lots of ash, lots of particles that go into the upper atmosphere and block out or decrease solar radiation and thus cool the planet by some amount.
Yeah, I found that quite fascinating because chemistry for sure isn't my thing. But Vince, the main character in Pinatubo 2, he's a chemical engineer. So I cast my character as an engineer who would understand chemistry and as well be able to, understand science and speak in engineering terms. So the most interesting thing is it's actually sulfur dioxide that comes out of that volcano in Pinatubo 2. There's the ash as well, but it's sulfur dioxide gas it has to get blown up into the stratosphere. Otherwise, it'll come out as acid rain. But way up in the stratosphere, there's almost no weather patterns, and it stays there for years. And the sulfur dioxide combines with the water that's up there into sulfuric acid aerosols. And those tiny little aerosols up there, those reflect and refract the solar radiation. So it's very interesting. So yeah, if you've got a business jet and you want to wire it up with a tank full of sulfur dioxide, as per David Keith, we can do it. We can do that. We know how to do that. Wouldn't cost very much. In fact, there's very interesting 1,000,000 to 1 cost benefit to it, in that you only need 1 millionth of the sulfur dioxide compared with the carbon dioxide. That's the global warming. So yeah, it's an interesting thing that people could be aware of, kind of thing. And unfortunately, at least in my view, what people are, it seems more and more scientists are talking about it right now, the reality of what we can do. And that solar radiation management is what David Keith called it. But there's multiple other ways of geoengineering, and some of them are safer than solar radiation management with sulfur dioxide. Sir David King, in fact, right now he's got an initiative, and he's trying to keep the Arctic ice sheet in place, the Arctic sea ice sheet in place, try to keep from losing it. So he's actively doing that right now, and it's a completely different method, but same idea. cool off the planet to offset or kind of try to counter impact what we're doing with our climate crisis right now. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, so you mentioned that there's a safety concern. Um, what would your concerns be if some government or multiple governments decided they wanted to do some solar radiation management and shoot a bunch of aerosols up into the stratosphere?
Yeah, I mean there's physical problems with it. One thing is that there's quite a list, but first to mind, the geopolitics that we're looking at right now. I just don't think some countries would be happy with it, and there's the potential for military action because that's the kind of
Mm,
thing we still do,
mm.
people here. So, but there's other problems with it. Yeah, it might just we can just keep using fossil fuels, for example. That's a common response to it, but it's hard. It's hard on the uh, sorry, I'm at a loss right now. It's hard on the atmosphere. It's difficult.
Mm.
It creates other problems up there. It's kind of like some people will make an analogy out of it, like you take some poison and then you take some other poison that's supposed to offset the first poison, and there's sort of a list of negatives about it, kind of thing. I mean, one of the very good things about it is that, as per Pinatubo, the, it does wash out. Within 3 or 4 years, the natural weather patterns will wash that sulfuric acid back out of it, and everything will be the way it was before. So that's a good thing about it. But you might think, oh, well, what if Krakatoa, a natural volcano, blew at exactly the same time as humans were attempting to cool off, and you get a double cooling whammy? And yeah, Snowpiercer is the film and film series that I've watched multiple times. They have a different scientific reason for it happening for them, but similar, like too cold. So, yeah, lots of risks involved. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And I really hear you about the geopolitical considerations because there's a lot of countries in the global south that would probably like to not have things warm up too much, but there also seem to be some countries in the north that are maybe eyeing opportunities in a thawing Arctic and thawing permafrost areas, where they're not as concerned and maybe more looking forward to it. So, maybe there's some, and when you shoot that stuff into the atmosphere, you're shooting it into the Earth's atmosphere, not into India's atmosphere or, whatever country's atmosphere. It's going to have a much wider impact. I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in Pinatubo 2, the first book, they're doing a global initiative, and that's part of the story. But in Krakatoa 2, the next one, what they're trying is very similar with the same technology, though, and they are trying to keep it regional. And
Hmm,
they've got huge engineering problems, no question, but they're making an attempt at it. So,
I
yeah,
see.
it's 5 years later, in the year 2033, 34, in that winter, that they're attempting to keep the Arctic ice frozen and keep it regional. Yeah, it's a challenge.
Hmm. So, when people think about how we're going to respond to climate change, um, there's sort of three different things people will talk about. And I'll sort of break them up into prevention, adaptation, and mitigation. And the idea of geoengineering to block solar radiation, or pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. That's like trying to fix a problem. So that would be mitigation. So that's one response. Um, Prevention would be, let's prevent ourselves from putting more CO2 into the atmosphere. So that could be, maybe we're using more renewables, maybe we're structuring our economic systems to be less intensive. Maybe we have a carbon tax. I believe Canada has a carbon tax, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, and then the third approach would be adaptation, and that's where you say, okay, well, these effects are going to happen, so I need to make changes to adapt. That could be some big city building a seawall against rising oceans, or moving communities further inland, or designing homes that are resilient to flash floods, or we're seeing more forest fires. So, doing design to try to adapt to more extreme weather events that we're seeing. So, sort of three different approaches that I'm seeing brought up. And since you're a person who thinks about the future, what kind of mix, if I may ask you to speculate, what sort of mix do you think you see going forward? And is there one of these that you see, maybe more emphasis on, or, would you pin your hopes more on one versus another? Where do you see things going?
Hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent outlook. In that, I mean, a brief response to prevention, the way I see it now, it's damage control at best, and it's what kind of damage and how much we're going to control. We have not prevented it, and we are not preventing it. So I'd leave that one alone now. But 20 years ago, I was, at the first conference, and it's about climate, and I'm doing my research, and there was the two topics, mitigation and adaptation. And I asked the guy at the end, he's a PhD from somewhere east, I think, and he says, my question, why are we focusing on adaptation as opposed to mitigation? Why aren't we solving this problem? And the only answer was, well, that's what people want to talk about.
Hmm.
Okay, interesting. So over the last time frame that I've been through, 20 years since then, I have been focused on mitigation, but not anymore. I don't see that happening. I don't see repeatedly. The last two possibilities on one solid quantified graph, we could have done it in 2008. That would have been an unbelievable opportunity with economic recession shift the economy. And then again, the Pinatubo, the, the pandemic. Yeah, the pandemic, again, exactly the same thing. Like we were on exactly the right trajectory, a 7% reduction annual in carbon, and we did the opposite and rebuilt the damaging economy that we had before. So I see very little purpose in mitigation attempts. Definitely not at a personal level. It's a waste of time. And I see very little coming out of any other source. So I've shifted now back probably the last couple of years since the pandemic. Since then, adaptation is the best thing to focus on. So something like the climate safe villages, I'm pretty excited about that initiative and to have come upon it, and that type of adaptation action, that is what makes the most sense to me. Um, again, sorry that it's always back to analysis, but the probability. the probability of that being the best approach is increasing and increasing rapidly. And there's still a small possibility before 2030 that some unknown event is going to come about, and we're actually going to intentionally get back on that 7% reduction annual, but it's not happening now. So yeah, it's still there as possible, but the probability of that happening is reducing. So yeah, I've shifted pretty much to adaptation. Yeah, and I think that well, it's got a lot of value in and of itself. Uh, Maybe our species is going through an evolutionary moment at this time, you could put it that way, kind of thing. Opportunity, which I like to think that way because it keeps me happier from day to day, as opposed to, oh, everything's terrible, it's going to collapse and that's the end of everything. So yeah, it seems that version of adaptation, the climate safe villages, what I envision actually is something of a network of villages similar, and there's already quite a few in place. You know, the eco villages, similar, not exactly the same, but a village level. In fact, the name of my last academic paper, the first title is Census Villages, and they are approximately the right population where we humans inherently engage with each other at a real level kind of thing. Yeah, between 400 and 700 is what that census village is, because it's our statistics, our national statistics source. But yeah, if we could have villages and a network of those well connected with each other, that's one of my biggest concerns. I hope we can do that. I really appreciate what's happening in Bellingham, Washington right now, and perhaps in northern Michigan. I'm not sure so much, but yeah, that is, in my view, one of the best strategies for adaptation at this point in time. So yeah, I'm cheering for adaptation now.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Um, okay, I think our time is just about up. So I just want to say thank you very much, Les, for speaking with me, and I've enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, I highly appreciate the time and the time you're putting into it as well, Tim. So really appreciate what you're doing.
Okay, thank you very much.